Thank you for joining us for the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime webinar. The Ohio Chapter American Academy of Pediatrics operates this program with the financial support of the Ohio Department of Health. The Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program, also known as PMP, has continued to evolve over the past several years to offer the best possible resources to you and the families you serve. Today we are excited to share more information feeding tips in the first 2 years. This is when children transition from breastfeeding to eating solid foods and becoming picky eaters. In this webinar, you will be hearing from 2 experts in obesity prevention, nutrition, and picky eating. We're excited to share the information from Dr. Robert Murray, a pediatrician from Columbus, Ohio, and past president to the Ohio Chapter American Academy of Pediatrics, will describe the baby or infant-led weaning and tips for transitioning to solid foods from breast milk or formula. Dr. Lauren Garbaz is a psychologist from Columbus, Ohio, who specializes in food avoidance and picky eating at Nationwide Children's Hospital. She will share tips for you to assist families who have picky eaters when referrals may be necessary. The Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program is here to assist you in your discussions with families regarding feeding in the first 2 years. We aim to provide tools that will make your interactions more meaningful in the limited time that you have with them and contribute to the positive, healthful behavior change. Now, we will take a look at some of the resources that may be helpful in discussing these topics. In order to access our resources, we recommend you visit our Ohio AAP website. This is the easiest way to access the PMP materials. This is available for all public health professionals at no cost and no login is required. When you visit the website www.ohioaap.org/PMP resources and click the box that best suits your role. If you're a community health worker that works with the care coordination system, you will find our handouts within CCS as well. Our first handout that may be useful during this webinar is our Transitions to Solids, a guide to baby-led weaning handout. This handout reviews when to know that a baby is ready for solid foods and how a parent or caregiver can start introducing solids. The other handout for today's presentation is the new Picky Eating handout. This will walk you through how to assist families who have picky eaters, including questions to ask young children about tasting new foods. The age-specific handouts also include helpful tips related to introducing solids and the need for introducing foods to infants several times. Our mobile app has other resources that may be helpful for you or your clients. This mobile app is free for download in the Google Play Store. When searching for the app, search for Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime rather than PMP to be sure to find the correct mobile app. To sign up for an account for the app, please follow the instructions here. You will create an account in order to receive helpful reminders and messages for you and your baby. We welcome our first speaker, Dr. Chris Bowling, to present how we can motivate families towards positive behavior change. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ohio chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics video, Baby-Led Weaning. You have probably heard people talk about baby-led weaning, but you may not know what it means or how it might help parents if they understood how to use it in an effective way. So today we're going to talk about child nutrition in the first months and years of life and how we can build up the child's acceptance of all foods by using the technique of baby-led weaning. We all like to say that infants and toddlers are playing all day, but that isn't exactly the truth. In fact, nearly every minute that they're awake, young children are studying their world. Everything is new to them. So as they explore each new thing, they use all of their skills to understand, what is this? What does it do? And what can I do with it? Babies start learning as soon as they're born. Through exploration, they build their brain. At birth, the baby has reflexes that help them with eating and grasping. Quickly, these reflexes become skills as the baby practices. Their fingers slowly become good at reaching, grasping, pulling things to the middle, putting them in their mouth and lips. Infants use all 5 senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, to help them understand every new object. Their arms and legs are so uncoordinated in the first months, but they gradually get stronger and smoother as they practice new movements. This is the platform on which the baby's brain develops. Parents need to provide a stimulating place for their infants and toddlers to play And that means lots of new environments and new things to explore and learn from, both indoors and outdoors. When a parent talks and sings, smiles and coos, it's not just baby talk. The baby reacts. They will try and keep the back and forth going through smiles or kicking their feet, making their own sounds, even before they have words. These simple moments, face to face, interacting with adults, make strong connections in the baby's brain. Back and forth communication is the most important thing that a parent can do to stimulate their baby's brain. At birth, a baby has 85 billion brain cells ready to go. On the left, you see lots of brain cells in the yellow part of the panel, but not many black connections between them. Look how fast those connections grow as the infant explores their world. The connections between brain cells grow thicker every day and reach a peak at 3 years of age. During that time, the brain doubles in size by 12 months of age and triples in size by 3 years, almost to the size of an adult brain. All of it is due to the learning experience during infancy, toddlerhood, and early childhood. The thick black connections that you see in the adult panel on the right are from repeated practice over years, following those critical first 3 years of development. Communication and encouragement to explore are the two tools that parents and caregivers can use to build the power of their child's brain. Think about this. If you give a 9-month-old a yellow plastic ball and say ball enough times, the child will say the word ball to mean the yellow plastic ball. But within just a few weeks, that same toddler will say ball whenever he sees any kind of ball that you show him. This means that the toddler recognizes that the word ball means something round, rolling, and bouncy, no matter what its color or what its size. That's a pretty amazing show of abstract thinking for a little baby. It's a sign that the child is learning really fast from everyday play. Every new experience is an opportunity for the baby to learn. Mealtime is too. It's not just about hunger and eating, but it's also about studying food with all its flavors, textures, colors, and smells. This is really important part of each child's day. They burn up so much energy learning and growing that we feed them 6 to 10 times a day in the period from birth to 3 years of age. It's important that the foods we choose for them are very high in quality, rich in vitamins and minerals, with a good balance of all 5 food groups: fruits, vegetables, whole grain foods, dairy, quality proteins such as fish and nuts, meats and eggs. No child eats the same amount of food each day. But if the parents will provide the food at regular times, and the food is high quality, and the portion size matches the child's age, then the baby can determine what they eat, how much they eat, and when they're full. Just like the back and forth communication parents should use early in life, this is the back and forth feeding communication that works best. The best first food for a baby is breast milk. It should be the only food for the first 6 months. Breast milk makes baby grow at their ideal rate. When 100% breastfeeding isn't possible, infant formula can be used as well. But there is no need or benefit from adding any other food during the first 6 months. Adding solid food too early tends to dilute the benefits of breast milk or formula and can make babies more picky and more overweight. We need to keep telling parents to avoid adding non-milk foods during the first 4 to 6 months. Parents can look for signs that their baby is ready to start solid food by looking for some developmental cues. Head control and the ability to sit with some support is one of the first things that makes the baby ready. This will be around 6 months of age. They quit using their tongue thrust to push food back out of the mouth regularly and start to show some interest in eating the things that parents and siblings are eating. Self-feeding is a learned skill. They have to coordinate their sensory and fine motor skills together, and this requires them to have reached a certain developmental level in terms of food and its texture and swallowing. But it's a good idea for parents to keep challenging the infant, gradually showing them new colors, new flavors, smells, and combinations of foods. They would steadily advance the texture between 6 months and 12 months from a runny texture to a thicker, more table food-like texture by the time the child's 1 year of age. Once the pediatrician gives the okay, the baby can start to add non-milk solid foods. In the past, it was believed that to avoid allergies, highly allergenic food should be avoided until the end of the first year. So parents would avoid giving fish, eggs, nuts, nut butters, cow milk, soy foods early. But recent research studies have shown that it's best for the infant to see those proteins early and often rather than waiting. That totally changes our feeding goals for the infant. Now, parents should try to offer small amounts of every possible food over and over again to ensure that their baby learns to accept it. At first, many babies will turn away from new flavors and textures, but with repeated experiences, they will learn to like it. So parents need to be patient and persistent. At every meal and every smaller between-meal snack, parents need to select highly nutritious foods from the 5 food groups, mixed and matched to stimulate the baby's exploration of new food. Between 6 months and 2 years, the child is very open to trying new foods. It's a unique opportunity. At the end of that time, they will have a pattern of foods that they prefer and are used to eating on a regular basis. The goal for parents is to make sure that the pattern is full of nutrient-rich foods from every food group and that the child is open to accept new foods that the parents may present. Infants and toddler foods do not have to be only foods purchased at a grocery store. All around the world, thousands of different foods are offered to babies. Whatever you're having, they can sample, as long as the texture matches their level of skill at swallowing. This type of skill will advance between 6 months and 12 months, but that's the only caution for the type of food that the child can experience. The texture should be thin at first and then gradually thicker until the child can eat regular table foods, usually around a year. Hard foods, such as nuts, are best left until the child's teeth are all in and their eating is better coordinated, so they're best not offered in the first year of life. What is baby-led weaning? Well, at the time that we first begin to feed the baby, most parents feed from a spoon, but baby-led weaning offers a slightly different way to approach feeding. It's offering different finger foods after 6 months that are in large, graspable pieces, and that the baby can suck on, smear, play with, and smell over and over again without really consuming a lot of the food. So spoon feeding occurs part of the time, and baby-led, graspable pieces of food are experienced the rest of the time. This mix allows the child to experience many, many different foods, their smell, their taste, how they feel, what they look like, and the sounds they make when the baby plays with them. And it's this exploration that can lead to a wide food acceptance of many, many different types of foods that traditionally have been difficult to get babies to eat. There are flavor windows between 4 months and 18 months where the child is sensitive to new foods but open to trying things. Studies have shown that if you blend a food that they're used to with another new food, they tend to accept that blend and accept the new food with it. So part of what we're trying to do is give a variety of different foods instead of large portions, small portions of many different things. One set of studies has shown that if you give a different vegetable every day for 5 days and then repeat that same cycle over and over again, that the child will accept those 5 foods very quickly. It is important when we pick our foods that they be nutrient-rich but low in salt or sugar during this time. Before 6 months of age, children don't do well with early solids. It tends to make them more picky for future foods to come. After 6 months, that same exposure to solid foods is readily accepted by the child, and it does not associate with pickiness. So one of the best things to do is breastfeed for the first 4 to 6 months exclusively, and then begin solid food to decrease the risk of a picky eater. You may read lots of opinions of the pros and cons of baby-led weaning. At this point, all of us are still learning about it. The claims that it prevents obesity or leads to poor nutrition have not been shown to be true. What has been seen is that babies like playing with food. It does help them explore each new food. It's safe, but it does require that parents stay with the baby to be sure they don't choke at first. And it is a little messy, but in a fun way. Watching a baby study a new food to learn about it is a joy in itself. Parents shouldn't feel the need to feed large volumes, large portions of food to the child. It's better to give the child smaller servings of many different things so that they get an experience with all the foods in the world that you can offer them. So look for starter portions and portions that they can handle, but do your best to keep variety of different colors, flavors, textures, and smells coming all the time, every day, as we feed them meals and snacks. Breast milk and infant formula lay a solid nutritional foundation under the child during that first year, and they are the thing that keeps the baby going as they experiment with new foods. So no other milks should be provided before the age of 12 months. Between 12 months and 24 months, many babies move away from breastfeeding and formula feeding and on to cow milk feeding. This is a good thing because the cow's milk actually provides that same platform under the child. You can see here that many different foods are offered to the child, some of them beneficial, such as fruits, and some less so, such as hot dogs. So it's an opportunity for us to pick different foods that are very high in nutrition and offer them to the child during this period between 6 months and 2 years. But it should be noted that the new policy from the American Academy of Pediatrics is to not provide fruit juice during the time between 6 months and 12 months to allow the baby to experience other foods and keep them drinking milk and formula and breast milk during this time. After 12 months, you can introduce small amounts of fruit juice, such as 4 ounces a day, that gives them the fruit experience, but does not overwhelm other foods in their diet. 12 months to 24 months is a critical transition period. The choices that we make and the opportunities that we offer to the child exposes them to many different foods that will form their first dietary pattern around the age of 2 years. So we don't want to narrow things down during the second year if we can help it. Children naturally become more picky, more selective. They tend to want to repeat the same foods over and over again, and it's up to us as the adults to keep offering them high-quality foods in a wide variety and keep giving them the opportunity to try new things. It's important during this time that we minimize certain foods that tend to push high-quality foods out of the diet. Those foods are things like desserts, candies, gum, cookies, things that have a lot of sugar or that have a lot of calories but don't have many nutrients, such as soft drinks or fruit drinks. The child should only have 3 kinds of beverages in their diet: milk, water, and 100% fruit juice in a small volume. This will allow them to expand their diet and make a strong diet by the age of 2. Although we call them snacks, Snack times during the toddler period and young childhood period are really mini meals. They're constructed in the same thoughtful way that regular meals are constructed. Almost all American children consume snack during this period because they need energy on a regular basis to handle growth and brain development. And as many as a third of kids during this time will eat 3 or more snacks a day. It makes up about a quarter of their total daily energy, so the choices that we make are fundamentally important to make sure that the child gets all their nutrients in every day. Look at the quality of the foods that you offer. Offer very little of foods that don't have high nutrition, and try and minimize the likelihood that candy and salty snacks, processed foods, get in the way of your child's development. Early life is characterized by the fastest growth in our whole life course, the fastest growth in height, weight, and brain. So diet quality is critical during this time. Our goals are to provide as many new food exposures and experiences as possible. Use the many colors, tastes, and textures of foods that you find all around you. Snacks are mini meals. Keep them high quality. Use small servings but big variety. And remember, in beverages, milk, water, or 100% juice are really the only beverages that the child should see in this critical period between 6 months and 2 years. Thank you.
Today, I'll be talking about picky eating when kids are selective about what they eat in the early years, 0 to 2. We're going to start off just looking at normal development as it pertains to feeding and consider some of the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations for how to help kids have a healthy, normal development with feeding. And then we'll move into some of the issues that can arise for parents and for those working with parents. So typically, kids start out with a narrow food preference. This is normal. Refusals are really age appropriate during this time period. Toddlers are developmentally learning to exert their autonomy, and that happens at meals and with food as well. Children really do need consistent limits and opportunities for learning during this time. That's going to become important during meal times. And children especially learn by watching and doing at this age. So modeling during meal times is incredibly important. So with parents in the really young ages of 6 to 12 months, as somebody working with parents, you can really support them by helping them promote healthy practices that will enable their kids to explore foods in an age-appropriate manner and hopefully make mealtime a really positive time for them. One of the big recommendations is using a high chair from an early age so that kids get used to this. I'll talk about some of the pitfalls with this, such as if parents don't have access to one, there isn't a table in the house. But in general, if we can have parents feed in a high chair rather than on a lap or while moving children around, that's really going to help support their posture and develop good oral motor skills and practices with eating. The next thing to really set kids up for success, or babies up for success, is to expose them to a variety of flavors and colors early on. Obviously following AAP recommendations for how and when to expose children to foods, but really allowing them over time to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of foods can prevent picky eating later in life. To help kids get used to what something tastes like, what the texture's like in their mouth, starting small is often helpful, and then offering more volume once a child gets used to it. So if we have a baby who really isn't going for the food, trying not to overwhelm them with a larger spoonful, but really, starting small and then building up as they get used to it can help. Some babies also, like purees as they start off foods, and others don't take to them very well. And as they get older, closer to 12 months, may be able to manage small pieces of soft food as long as it's small and not a choking hazard. And they may take to this a little bit easier than they do purees. So that may be one thing to try if a parent is concerned that a baby is not taking to the purees. One thing parents often are concerned about is gagging and grimacing when babies are trying new foods. This is completely normal. It has nothing to do with whether they like or don't like the food. They don't really know that very well at this age. Everything is new and different. So helping parents see this as a normal behavior rather than something they need to try to avoid. Gagging happens as babies are getting used to how to manage the food in their mouth. As long as it's something that's not a choking hazard, it's soft or it's pureed, gagging is not unsafe. We'll talk about later on whether it may become a cause for concern if it's happening frequently, but typically it's a normal part of learning to eat. So parents need a lot of reassurance in this area. We also want to make sure parents are offering the same food over and over, even if babies are making a face with it or occasionally turn away. Not a lot of pressuring, but just giving them lots of chances to try that particular food or flavor over and over. And another pitfall that can happen that can lead to picky eating later is if we're too careful with cleaning kids up and not letting them get food on them. It can really help them get used to the sensory experience of eating if they get really messy and there's food on their hands and mouths. That's really needed at this age. So we want to encourage families to allow babies to do that. As kids get older in that second year of life, from ages 1 to 2, we really want to continue offering a variety of foods on a regular basis. They need all of this exploration of the food over and over to really develop a liking for those kinds of healthy foods that we want them to get used to. So it's important to be consistent with offering those foods. Again, whether or not it seems like it's a preferred food for the child, we want the parent to decide what's a good food to expose the child to, not letting the child dictate what they think they should be eating. And if we allow kids to dictate too young what they're offered, we do end up sort of limiting and narrowing their diet over time. And that can be really difficult to undo later on. We also want to expose kids over and over to the same foods without pressure. So if they perceive this as a negative thing or a scary thing because there's a lot of pressure being put on it, they may shy away from those foods more readily at this age. So if they're pushing foods away or refusing, we just don't make it a big deal. We leave it there. We let them know it's still something that they need to be exposed to, but we're not going to really push it at this age because they will probably refuse more if we do that. Instead, using lots of positive reinforcement for trying new foods. So great job taking that bite. Way to go eating your vegetables. Lots of clapping, singing, positive attention when they're exploring and eating these new foods. Another thing during this age that's really important is to limit a lot of snacking between meals. Their small bellies get full quickly, and if there's a lot of snacking going on in between the structured meals of the day, kids are not as hungry to eat and are not going to be as willing to explore new foods. So kids are going to be most willing to explore food if they're hungry. So we want to offer those at meal times and make sure that they haven't just filled up on snack foods. And that would include drinks with calories. Kids this age should really primarily be drinking milk and water. Milk has a lot of calories, so offering that at mealtime is better practice than between meals. Kids absolutely can fill up and graze on a sippy cup of milk throughout the day. So it's important to kind of keep that out of reach and offer water instead. And finally, continuing to use either a high chair or a booster seat with a lap strap during meals is really important. Child-size tables and chairs are really popular, but for particularly kids who tend to be a little picky or less interested in food, they don't often want to stay at those tables and end up walking around and just don't tend to eat as well. That's true for almost all toddlers this age. So really keeping them at the table in some kind of a chair that they can't get out of at will is going to lead to a better meal. So in practice, parents will often come up with some barriers to these recommendations. One way for babies to handle offering foods frequently is you can offer one food per meal, but rotate the foods often. You might pick sweet potatoes that you would offer them, but then you would, the next day offer a different food, and then the next day offer a different food so that you can continue to have some variety in their diet. But for toddlers, you could offer 2 to 3 foods within one meal, and that would give them a lot more exposure to different foods rather than continuing the one food per meal that you might do for babies. You can, help them eat one food at a time if you were to do that, or you could give all of their food on a tray or a plate. That's sort of child specific. If they seem to get overwhelmed or only eat one food on the plate and they don't want to touch the others, you might offer one at a time and then bring in the second or the third food. You might start with the food that they are least interested in so that you're offering it when they're the most hungry, and they can't fill up on their favorite food and then not offer their favorite food until later in the meal. Or for kids that can handle it, you could offer all 3 at once. Another important practice that doesn't happen as routinely these days as everybody is busy, kids do best when adults sit and eat with them as much as possible. So ideally, a parent's eating their own meal to model and be social with their child or children. But even if that's not possible, at least sitting down and providing some positive attention during the meal with children really makes for a better and healthier mealtime. It's also appropriate. Parents can encourage autonomy with eating, again, letting them get messy. However, if they are choosing not to eat, it's still appropriate at this age for parents to pick up a spoon or a fork and help their child. So this is really sort of a child-specific recommendation. You can allow mealtime to be child-led as far as which foods and how much they consume at this age. So your job as a parent is to put down the food that you would like to give them the opportunity to eat. Your job is not to choose how much they eat necessarily. That's really should be up to the child and their satiety cues. Sometimes what can happen is parents will get into a routine of, if a child doesn't want what's put in front of them, going and finding other things in the kitchen to offer. And that can set up some detrimental practices because child starts to pick up on that, and they may start to offer suggestions of what they want instead of the meal. Again, it's the adult's responsibility to put the meal in front of the child. It's the child's responsibility to figure out what and how much they're going to eat. So again, if a child doesn't eat well at a meal, we really don't want to get in the habit of giving them preferred snacks instead of the meal or right after the meal, because they can start to learn to avoid the healthier foods that may not be as preferred if they know they're going to be able to fill up on those preferred snacks instead. So what does this look like? There's some pictures here of food choices on a plate. Notice the small portions. Toddlers do not need large portions. We can use positive reinforcement for trying a new food. This may be clapping, singing, just a lot of praise and excitement. Some kids really enjoy something like bubbles during the meal, particularly if a food is challenging for them and they're exploring it for the first time and seem to be having a hard time with that. Sometimes bringing out something special like bubbles may help them be a little bit more open to trying it. We want to shoot for 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks per day for toddlers. So again, really not falling into that grazing pattern all through the day, but trying to keep some structured meals in place for them so they learn how to get hungry over the span of several hours, and then fill up their belly at a meal, and then get hungry, fill up their belly. And eating together is really an important practice that goes a long way if it's started young. So as somebody who goes into a family's home or maybe meet with a family at a center, you are in a really important place to be encouraging these types of healthy family practices from an early age. So one area that I find that parents often need assistance with is accessing appropriate seating for their child and within the family. So when spaces are small, families often feel like they can't fit a table, or it's hard to maybe afford or find a high chair. So I try to help families think outside the box a little bit. Maybe I've had families use a folding card table that can then be put away when they're not at mealtime, or utilize garage sales or secondhand stores to find high chairs. Another area that parents can often use support with is creating a predictable meal schedule for their children. Oftentimes, for parents that don't follow a very structured routine for themselves, this can be really hard for them to do for their children. So it may be talking with them about their schedule and how can you set up a breakfast, lunch, and meal time that you can model for your kids and have them at the table with you. Families don't often understand why they need to do that if their kid is happy to just sort of eat all through the day. But like I said, it's important to help them learn physiologically how to build up hunger and then satiate that hunger by filling up their belly, which they can't do if they're never truly hungry because they're always grazing. Of course, there are a lot of barriers these days to work around, including a variety of work schedules, other commitments that often get in the way of families eating together. So it doesn't necessarily need to be every meal of the day. It may be, more of a snack time that families can sit down together, even if all the family members can't be available at a certain meal time. But finding a time to all sit around the table can be really beneficial for kids. And also, having access to a wider variety of foods. There may be more foods that than a child who's 0 to 2 can eat, but they are seeing those foods on the table, and they're seeing the adults eat those foods. That's incredibly important at this age. So when you work with these families, being able to model using praise and positive reinforcement for trying new foods is incredibly important. Some of these parents may not be as comfortable with that kind of enthusiastic attention that may be a little bit outside of their personality, or maybe they didn't experience that growing up, and that may feel a little foreign to them. But kids absolutely need to know when they're approaching new foods and trying out new foods that this is a good thing, and the only way they can know that is if the adults around them react really excited and positively towards it. Encouraging approaching foods doesn't necessarily need to be immediately taking a bite of it. So helping parents understand that other things that we can praise kids for include touching a food, kissing it, putting it to their lips, licking foods, touching the food to their teeth if they're still not quite ready to open the mouth, and then we can move on to taking a little nibble of it. So you may end up having a child exposed to the same food 15 times before they actually are ready to take a nibble of it. These are a variety of parental concerns that I've often heard, and you may hear as well. So one thing I hear is, why would I give food to my child that they won't eat? It's a waste of time for me preparing it. It's a waste of money. That's a true statement, but if we never continue to expose the child to that food, they don't have the opportunity to get used to it. And again, it may take 15 to 20 times of a child being exposed to a food before they can actually really approach it or chew and swallow it. So they need those opportunities over and over. One thing that I will do to combat this is remind families that they can just give a small piece of food. They don't need to make an entire bowl of macaroni and cheese if they are quite certain their child won't eat macaroni and cheese. But they can put just a small portion on their plate. Maybe they give the rest to another child. Maybe they eat the rest. Maybe they freeze the rest and they just take out small portions that they can put as a side on their child's plate over and over. When you're putting 3 or 4 things on the child's plate for each meal, if it's a toddler, they are having the chance to be exposed to a food, but have other foods that they can choose from, even if they don't eat that particular food regularly. There may just be one day that they go ahead and try it. So if the food's never there, there's no opportunity for them to come around and finally do it. So another thing parents are concerned about often is, I want to find foods my child likes. A parent doesn't want to feel like they're forcing a food on a child that they don't like. Something that I often remind families about is that when kids are this young, they really don't know yet what they like. So they just know if something is familiar or if something is different. And they may have some tastes that they inherently like a little better than others. But, I'll often tell them if I only ate what I really like the best, I probably wouldn't be very healthy. I'd have a diet of chocolate and soda and all kinds of things that aren't great for me, in large quantities. So that is what happens with our kids who tend to be more picky, is their diet may narrow down and down just to the things that they like the best. And we're not healthy if we just have a diet like that. So we need to help parents understand that kids sometimes need to learn to tolerate foods by trying them over and over again, just to get used to them. A lot of kids don't like foods that are different than something that they prefer. So we're really helping kids get used to something that's different. It's not about like or dislike as much at this age. Parents will often talk about being tired at the end of the day. They don't want to fight with their child about eating. And this is absolutely a realistic concern. Again, I remind parents, your job is to put the food down in front of them, and their job is to eat, and they're going to eat as much as they need, and then you let the rest go and you try again at the next meal. And kids are pretty good at this age at filling up on maybe what they didn't get at one meal because they were tired or cranky, and filling up at another meal. So it's pretty common at this age to have some meals that are good and some meals that where they don't eat much, and that's okay. But the more that we fight with our child and the more that we get upset about it, they'll pick up on that, and that tends to keep the refusal going, actually. Parents talk about not having a variety of food to offer. So, there may be strategies to help them problem solve how to keep a variety of food in the cupboards, whether others are eating it or it's just hard to keep the cupboards stocked. But there are creative ways to think about offering even small amounts of food. A serving of peas for a child this age, might only be 3, 4, 5 peas. So it doesn't need to be a lot of each type of food they're offering. We've talked through being able to problem solve, having a table and chairs. Families often don't like to eat or often prefer to eat in front of the television and don't like to eat at a table. So keep in mind that, if we're asking them to eat a family meal, that can often be a real culture shift within their household. But once you start talking with families about what they want for their children and what they think would be good modeling, when they really think about it, they often want to provide those good, healthy experiences for their kids. They're just oftentimes tired and, like all of us, get into habits, and those can be hard to break. But typically when we have those discussions, they're willing to, at least for one meal a day, make some changes. And some parents just really don't like when their kids make a mess. And they don't like when they throw food, which is really common at this age. So there are a number of ways that I help address these concerns in addition to what we just talked about. So offering small amounts of food at a time can minimize food waste. Giving a child some of your own meal is a way to encourage variety without having to waste a lot of food. Preparing foods ahead of time and freezing them in small quantities. Trying to pair preferred foods with less preferred foods can help with acceptance. So again, variety can be in very small quantities. If they love fruit, they might have mainly a fruit puree, and then you can mix some vegetables in. And helping parents remember that food is a sensory experience. Kids need to get messy to help them begin to tolerate that kind of these kinds of new experiences. Parents get frustrated about behaviors such as throwing food, which is an age-appropriate thing between 0 and 2. It's helpful to talk to families about why that behavior might be occurring. A common reason kids throw food, one is to maybe communicate that they don't want it, and that's their only way of communicating. Another might be boredom. How long are they sitting in the chair? Are they getting a lot of attention for throwing the food? So sometimes helping to intervene, you can figure out why the behavior is occurring. There may be ways to intervene where you can prevent that behavior from occurring at all. Maybe we just shorten how long the child's sitting in the chair. Maybe we need, once they start throwing food, maybe we realize, they're probably telling us that they're finished, and so we're going to take it away. And then it's not as much of a concern. That leads into talking about pinpointing some of the reasons that refusal behavior might occur. If we can figure out why this behavior is happening, then we have a better chance of being able to figure out a way to either prevent it or keep it from happening so much in the future. You don't necessarily need to get to the root cause of every behavior to manage it, but if you're seeing patterns of behaviors, it might help you problem solve. So if we end up having toddlers who are refusing frequently and parents are sort of at their wits' end with this, we may start to think about, are there certain meals this is happening at? Common reasons for toddlers to refuse foods are being tired. So is the meal occurring during their nap time? If it's always happening at lunch and their nap is at 1 o'clock, are they just too tired to be eating? Can we make their lunchtime a little bit earlier so they're not as tired? Or can we make their nap a little bit earlier and feed them when they get up? Those are, things to problem solve with parents to help certain meals go better. Is dinner just too late for the child and they really need to be winding down sooner and getting ready for bed? Boredom is another common reason that toddlers are refusing meals. So they, again, may be sitting in the chair too long. If nobody's sitting with them, they may get bored sitting in the chair by themselves. So there are ways that you can address that behavior by maybe changing the environment a little bit if you know that boredom may be the reason they're refusing. Toddlers are often get throw food or start to refuse a lot when they're feeling full or they're finished. So sometimes parents don't realize that that's a communication strategy, and it's okay to let a child determine when they're finished. This is actually a really helpful practice for teaching them to learn to listen to their own satiety cues and can prevent obesity down the line. Sometimes a child is getting sick, and that's a common time for kids to refuse to eat. There also may be life changes or adjustments going on eating is one of the things a child can control. And so when their routines get disrupted or they're stressed, you may see that come through in refusing to eat. Sometimes toddlers just get distracted easily, or they're overwhelmed by a lot that's going on. So for some kids, really making sure you minimize distractions during meals can go a long way in having a better meal time and having them be a little bit more open to new experiences and trying new foods. Another big one is sometimes because a child might be tired or bored or any of those things we just distracted, they may learn they can just throw a tantrum and pretty quickly get down. So it's important for parents. We want to listen to kids' hunger cues, and we want to let them tell us when they're full. But if they're simply throwing a tantrum and it does, and they've hardly eaten anything, it's a good idea to just, give them a few more minutes to try rather than just getting them down immediately every time they start to throw a tantrum, because that can become a negative cycle pretty quickly, and it teaches kids not to like their high chair, because if they just want to get down and they get down quickly, then they learn maybe that's not a place I want to be. So ways to address some of these causes for food refusal, check in with the family. Is the child really getting enough sleep overnight? Are they napping enough and for long enough? As we talked about, does a meal need to move before or after a nap time? When families follow a routine so that the child eats at predictable times in the high chair, that can really help a child's behavior and help their body learn when to get hungry and when they would expect to get full because they're sort of predictably being put in the high chair to eat and they're ready for it. For toddlers, it can be really helpful. Older toddlers, I would say closer to 1.5 to 2, would be really helpful to offer 2 to 3 choices at meals. Sometimes families will get in the habit of saying, "What do you want to eat?" And they will sort of offer the whole kitchen. That's really overwhelming to toddlers. They don't really know what they want to eat. They get overwhelmed with too many choices. So if a parent does want to offer them the choice of what to eat, narrowing that down to 2 things, one in each hand, which one? And sometimes they'll make a choice, and when you put that in front of them, they still don't want that. And that's just a typical toddler thing. And I would encourage families, once that choice is made and it's in front of them, that is what they're eating. Again, if we start offering too many things and give them choices after they've refused food, that reinforces refusing food, and they learn they can do that. So once a choice is made, that's what they should be having. But sometimes for some toddlers, being able to make that choice helps them be a little bit more interested in meals. Another common reason for food refusal, again, is children communicating that they're all done by throwing. So one way to address this is to teach them to communicate, which we want to be encouraging anyway for development, instead of throwing. So whether that's teaching them the sign for all done, or handing you their plate, or being able to say all done, that's really the best way to teach them there's another way to get your attention besides throwing food or something that a parent may not appreciate as much. So another reason we mentioned that children may refuse food is because they're distracted. A couple of ways to address this are being able to sit at the table with the child, engaging them in conversation, playing relaxing music for the child. Some children just find this soothing, but it's also something in the background, and it keeps them from getting bored. Being playful with children, a lot of positive attention while they eat also helps. But we also don't want things to be too distracting, so kind of limiting what we're offering at the table to something that is right in front of them and not too distracting. Finally, making sure a child is calm before you take them out of the high chair can be a really helpful way to keep from reinforcing that pattern of you cry, I get you down from the high chair. So if they're, if they were tantruming, but you can wait for them to calm down and then take them out of the high chair, that's going to help them have a much more positive experience with the high chair and make it much more likely that they're happy to get in it again to eat. So there are a few different contributors to picky eating that are less common. I've talked in a very developmentally broad way. Picky eating is a spectrum, and it's something that's really typical within this age range. However, with any spectrum, there's an extreme end. And so on the extreme end of picky eating, we see some of these issues develop that often require some additional treatment. So there are some children that just have a more anxious temperament, and these children do tend to be more picky eaters. And from 0 to 2, it's still developmentally typical, but they may give their parents a harder time or have a narrower diet than other kids their age. We don't typically address picky eating as a result of anxiety until children are a little bit older, and we may have expected by then that they would have grown out of some of those picky eating behaviors, or if the selective eating is so extreme that they only have a few foods in their diet. Oppositional behavior is another contributor to extreme picky eating. Typically, these kids will be having pretty challenging behaviors both within meals and also outside of meals. And these children often give their parents a really hard time, and parents often need a little bit more specialized skill set to manage their behavior, and that may require working with a behavior specialist to help their parent learn how to manage these behaviors that are occurring both within meals and outside of meals. Another reason that some children may look like picky eaters or may not eat quite enough volume at meals are because of oral motor delays. These children, again, sometimes these delays may be able to be addressed within early intervention, but a lot of times these kids also need to be referred out for specialists to help develop their oral motor skills. And a number of complications in children's histories can lead to more challenging feeding difficulties than we might normally see developmentally. So certainly if children have a history or currently requiring tube feeding, if they have a history of prematurity, other medical complications, reflux, even some children who have a lot of allergies may develop feeding difficulties, and these could require some specialized intervention. Other undiagnosed medical conditions may be present that can cause feeding difficulties and may require referrals to be assessed and diagnosed. So symptoms that include vomiting, weight loss, slow weight gain, rashes, difficulty swallowing, coughing, or choking with food or liquid are often cause for concern, and children should be referred to their pediatrician to help assess those kinds of concerns. Pediatricians may decide to refer to a specialist in a number of different scenarios. There may be need for an oral motor evaluation to address a variety of difficulties eating food, and those would be more issues with the mechanics of eating food, not so much the willingness or desire. Those two things can interact, and if eating is hard for a child, that can make them less interested or less willing to do it, even if the root cause is because they have oral motor delays. Other children may benefit from a psychological evaluation or behavioral evaluation because there are other developmental or behavioral concerns, if there's significant anxiety, if there's significant parental stress around meal times, just so that somebody can be supporting the parent in implementing some of the helpful strategies we've talked about. If a child has fewer than 10 foods in their diet by the age of 2, that would be a reason to get a specialist involved. And if the child is overcompensating for not eating by drinking too much liquid, in particular milk. and we've discussed some of the reasons for further medical evaluation. So we want to keep in mind that most issues we're going to see developmentally are typical within age 0 to 2, but if there are extreme or unusual symptoms going on, we want to make sure that those families are referred to the right place, as feeding difficulties can be extremely stressful for families to manage. Thank you for joining me for talking about picky eating in ages 0 to 2. And thank you for all the work you do with these families. It's incredibly meaningful.
We sincerely appreciate you spending your time with the Ohio AAP to learn more about these important topics impacting children's nutrition and play. You can access the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime resources on our Ohio AAP website. Thank you to our presenters for all they do for the Parenting at Mealtime and Playtime program and for Ohio's children. If you have any questions for Ohio AAP, please don't hesitate to call us at 614-846-6258. A big thank you to you for your ongoing efforts to assist Ohio's families.